Ramuji, the chairperson, Professor Sanjeeva Reddy. Good evening. I think my presence here today has humbled me for two reasons. And I apologize that I cannot speak in Telugu, so I will speak in English as I did the last time. But my presence here is humbling me for two reasons. One is obviously that in less than 2 months, I have been invited again. And I think this is a humbling experience. I am deeply honored for this invitation. Thank you very much. I believe the Vedika does not really invite people again and again, which is a good practice. So I think my presence here today either is a bad practice or is humbling. And I will go with the fact that it has humbled me completely. The second reason why I feel humbled by my presence here today is that I'm speaking, last time I spoke on Gandhi. This time I'm speaking on Gandhi and Marx. And I'm speaking in an organization which is committed to Gandhi and Marx, as well as to Ambedkar and with the guidance of Purushottam Raoji. I do miss his presence here today, but I believe he has some important work for which he could not make it. So this is also very humbling that you have an outsider come and actually speak on Gandhi and Marx to an organization which is committed to Gandhi and Marx. And I will make reference to Ambedkar a couple of times, not more than that, because I think Ambedkar is somewhat different from Gandhi and Marx. So I am humbled and I thank you so much for this invitation. I hope I live up to the expectations of you all. I decided to title my presentation The Imperative of Dissent. And why have I put this title? When I was thinking about the title, I thought, what is it that is most important that Gandhi and Marx has taught us? In what way have they contributed? And I thought dissent. And I said, let me call it the imperative, the need for dissent. And I'll talk about it in the lecture. And interestingly, I picked up a book. And I brought the book along with me. And this is after I had sent you the title. I picked up a book. It is written by Raveen Jahan Beglu. He was in the Department of Political Science, Baroda University. Soon after I went back from here, I invited him. He's an Iranian scholar who was imprisoned in Iran for staging or working out a revolution against the Iranian government. He was kept in solitary confinement for 4 months. Then his wife, who is a Canadian, petitioned the United Nations, the Canadian government. And he was released after many scholars all across the world petitioned the United Nations, and he was released. And interestingly, he is the reason why Canada breaks diplomatic ties with Iran. All right? So I picked up his book, and interestingly, his book is called A Disobedient Indian. Gandhi. Gandhi is a disobedient Indian. In school, we are taught we should be obedient. At home, we are taught we should be obedient. I was fascinated by the title because I was making his profile to introduce him, and I read A Disobedient Indian. So I bought the book. And I was reading it, and one of the chapters is the imperative of dissent. So I said, oh my God, now it will seem as if I have taken the title from him, but I have not. So those of you, when you open this book and you see this, I did not take it. It's a mere coincidence. All right. Why do we need to look at Gandhi and Marx? And this is a problem which I think we face when we deal with people who are bygone. They have gone. I'm not talking about gone in a lived sense. I'm talking about gone in an even conceptual sense. Marx and Gandhi both are gone. We do not give, in fact, Gandhi is coming back to India, but Marx is gone. We don't, and the state where I come from, the state where I live, not come from, the state where I live, Gujarat, there is no sign of Marx at all. There is no trade union. There is nothing. Okay. So you begin, when I stand up to teach Marx in the class, some students say, why Marx? What is the relevance of Marx? So what is the relevance of Marx and Gandhi? I think it is important to look at thinkers, because only when we look at thinkers will we be able to understand our present reality. Not only understand present reality, we will be able to shape our future. So for instance, if you want to understand democracy, you cannot understand democracy if you do not look at the arguments of Locke, Bentham and Rousseau, and in India, people like Nehru and Gandhi. Similarly, those of us who are critical of the way religion relates to the state in India, we cannot understand the relationship if we do not read the ideas of Gandhi and Nehru. Today, we will say we'll have to read also the ideas of Savarkar to understand the criticism which is coming forward. So we have to understand, we have to read these thinkers, because they not only tell us why we are holding the political system the way we are, but they also shape our future reality. It's a bit disappointing that two thinkers, and I'm saying this, I'm starting negatively, I will not end negatively, that two thinkers who have changed the way we look at the world often have to be justified when you're talking about them, Gandhi and Marx. Gandhi changed the way we look at the world. Gandhi is someone, and we all know that Gandhi is someone who talked about ahimsa. Gandhi is also someone who began the anti-colonial movement. And when I say anti-colonial movement, I'm really talking about questioning colonization. Gandhi did it. Before that, no one did it. And obviously Marx is important for some other reasons which I will try and detail when I'm. So we have two thinkers. Marx, you can't understand the contemporary world without Marx. So there are two thinkers who have changed the way we look at the world, and when we stand up, we have to first justify why Gandhi Marx. And I'm saying this because I stay in Gujarat and I know the problems that one faces. Gandhi is a Gujarati. Yet there is very little place for him there. The Sabarmati ashram is there. We have many ashrams in Gujarat. There is somebody called Sudarshan Iyengar who is a Gandhian, and in Dharmaj he has a ashram. I went to visit him and I said, Sudarshan Bhai, what is this? I mean, how are you going to make Gandhi relevant like this? He says, I'm trying my best, I can't change the world. So, I hope that with the lecture or with the talk, I'll be able to at least explain why, in my opinion, Gandhi and Marx are still relevant. As well as, and how do I do this? I'm going to compare them. I'm going to bring out their similarities and their differences. But I'm not going to say which one is better for me, because then you'll have to choose which one do you think is the contextual thing. So for instance, today in India, perhaps Gandhi is more relevant than Marx. Alright, so let me begin with the points of similarity, and then I'll move to the points of difference. The first similarity, if you were to ask me, is both Gandhi and Marx are equally concerned with changing the social political order. They are not satisfied, and this is one important commonality, that both Gandhi and Marx are not satisfied with the existing reality. And both of them, I will explain why they are not satisfied. But I want to begin with something very positive about Gandhi and Marx. That both Gandhi and Marx want to change the existing reality. Marx wants to change capitalism, change it, not tweak it, not thoda nut bolt dila kar. everything will be fine. Just pass one law and everything will be fine. Let us make one amendment and everything will be fine. No, you have to completely change the system. The system cannot be cosmetically treated. Sometimes we think if we put cosmetic, we will look prettier. And that is why we say makeup. The word makeup, I think we should stop using it, because the word makeup really means you're making up for a shortcoming. I know I have a shortcoming, therefore I make up. Okay? So we know we have shortcomings, we make up with one or two laws. Gandhi and Marx know. They want to change the social political order. Gandhi wanted to end any form of alien rule, not only colonization, any form of alien rule. And Marx wanted to end capitalism. How? Interestingly, they both talk about a utopia. That what are they looking at? And we will criticize them. Okay, this is all idealism. This is all not possible. What is the point of talking about Ram Rajya? What is the point of talking about communist utopia? What do you do with this? I think there is a message in that. And that message is what I would like to call, what is common to both Gandhi and Marx is they give us a politics of hope. There is hope. Today in India, we are devoid of hope. There is very little hope. If I ask people, what do you think will happen to India in 2040? Very little hope. Please, I'm not saying malls banenge, we'll have more cars, we'll have more mobiles, smarter phones. That is not hope. Hope is when your existing life becomes better. When you are, it's not a coincidence that you have United Nations now talking about happiness index. What is this happiness index? India is very low. In fact, we don't talk about happiness because if we do that, we'll be a miserable situation. How many of us are really happy? I don't want him to tell you to raise your finger, because not your hand, but even your finger. Because we know the situation in India. But what are these two people doing? They're giving you a politics of hope, aspiration. And that hope is what knowledge is supposed to do. That is what we as social scientists, or I as a social scientist, need to do. I have to give hope. I have to work out hope. Today, if you look at the parliament, there is very little hope. You look at society, very little hope. We send our children to school. There was this one friend of mine who said, the amount of money I will spend on educating my child from class 3 to post-graduation in a decent school, if I put all that money in the bank, and when he turns 21, I give him the money with the interest, he'll be able to start a business. Jabki after doing post-graduation, there is no guarantee that he will get a job. And I really thought, maybe this man is right. Maybe education also has no hope. Even education has no hope. Now this is sad, but both Gandhi and Marx are giving us hope. Please do not look at the utopia. Look at the politics of hope. The second commonality is both were concerned with exploitation and oppression. They were both concerned. And here I would also like to add Ambedkar. And both of them put exploitation and oppression at the center of their political thinking. This was not at the margins. For some, theek hai, baat kar le about the people who are low, the people who are denied, the people who are oppressed. I'm saying this to a male gathering, but for one madam sitting on my left. When we teach political science, and Professor Sanjeeva Reddy will correct me if I'm wrong, when we teach political science in departments of political science, the whole paper goes on, we teach liberalism, Marxism, democracy, communitarianism, everything. And then we have one little, at the end, bang at the end, we have one topic, feminism. Alright? So we give attention, we pay attention. I'm not a feminist, but we pay attention to women. हो गया ना? We gave you some space. That is not Gandhi and Marx. Gandhi and Marx did not place the oppressed, the exploited, whether it was caste, class, gender, even animals. Gandhi writes on animals. Actually, it's difficult to find this man not writing on something. He's written on almost everything. So Gandhi and for Marx, the oppressed should be our focus, not the privileged. The third, and I will soon lose count because as I've always said, I find it very difficult to enumerate. I'm very bad at maths. One more commonality between Gandhi and Marx is both blame the oppressed for their exploitation. Here even Ambedkar said, why are the Dalits doing the job of Dalit? Why are you doing this job? What does Gandhi say? See, there is one concept we have in philosophy, which is the relationship between existence and consciousness. What is this? Consciousness is I think, how I think, what I think. Existence is how I live. Alright? And it goes back to what I was saying yesterday, Descartes. I think, therefore I am. So you have this relationship between the way you think and the way you act. The way you think and the way you live. So Hegel says, he's a canonical philosopher, German philosopher. According to Hegel, the way you think, you will live like that. So if I think like a teacher, I will live like a teacher. If I think like a woman, I will live like a woman. I will exist like a woman. Marx says no. Existence determines consciousness. The way you live is the way you will think. So if I'm living like a worker, I will think like a worker. If tomorrow, as a worker, I win Kaun Banega Crorepati, 7 crores, and I become a capitalist. 7 crores is not enough to become a capitalist in India today. But say I start my capitalist venture. Will I continue to think like a worker? I will change. I will become a capitalist. My thinking will change. Right? So your existence determines your consciousness. This is Marx. He turned Hegel upside down. That if you're a worker, you will think like a worker. If you're a capitalist, you will think like a capitalist. What about Gandhi? Gandhi, so if you're a worker, you blame yourself. You have to change the situation. Do not wait for the capitalist to give you charity. You'll have to change your own situation. What about Gandhi? Gandhi writes that why are Indians enamored by British civilization? Why do we want to be like them? Fanon has written this wonderful book called Black Skin, White Mask. And I think I mentioned it last time. Black Skin, White Mask. We are black, we are dark, we are not white, but we love fair skin. We love to be fair, fair and lovely. Why? Why do you want to become what you are not? The minute you say, I want to become white, you have accepted the domination of the white. So you should be who you are. You should think from where you are. So both of them believe that the worker and the Indian are complicit. They are because first what they should accept that they are responsible for their situation and then change the situation. Unless you do not take the responsibility, you will not change your situation. I cannot expect that my family will come and save me from whatever situation I am. And please remember, this is not even family. This is public space. So I cannot expect that if the tap in my bathroom is not functional, my neighbor is going to come and repair it. Why? I have to repair it myself. Also, both Gandhi and Marx, they see an inherent link between thinking and practice. There is a little difference here. Marx does not practice the way Gandhi practices, and I'll talk about that a little later. But both for Gandhi and for Marx, you cannot divorce thinking from practice. If you think, you must act. It is different that Marx did not act, Gandhi acted. And I'll talk about that as a difference later on. One common thing to both, in a different way, is that, see, there is one aspect which dominates our life, and that is the private-public divide. So this is public space. I am now in public space. When I go home, I enter my private space, my personal space. And this is something which we think is very important for us. This is very important. Who rules the public life? The state. So when we are out of home, we follow the rules of the state. Whether it's the traffic rules, or for instance, there is this allegation that, or there is this assumption that students have damaged public property. Right? So you have damaged public property which was not yours. If I damaged my own car, that's fine, but I cannot damage public property. So public is something which is different from private. What is private? Private is freedom. What is public? Public is state control. All right? Private is considered, and this is not me, but if you go to the beginning of the understanding of the divide, private is considered naturally just. There is no need for the state to enter our home and tell us how to live. That is naturally just. It's natural. What is private is natural. What is public is what the state should do. So the state cannot come home and tell me this is how you should live. That is no business of the state. But how do we live in the private? Well, naturally. And what is natural is not political. For instance, and I say this all the time, if the plant is green, it is not an Islamic conspiracy. Right? This is not an Islamic conspiracy. This is natural. Right? So the private is considered natural and the public is considered something that we have to keep on working with. Separate. What does Marx say? Marx says the economy which you consider as private, capitalism, is political. It is based on exploitation. It is based on enmity. It is based on, it is not based on friendship. It is based on oppression. It is based on domination. How can this be naturally just? Right? So according to Marx, public-private divide is not right. There is no public-private divide. This is why when Marx talks about communist utopia, there is no private. In fact, there is no private property. What does Marx say? Marx says, why do you want to go home and hoard? When I'm in the department and I give the class on Marx, I go home and the first thing I do is I take out all, this I did for the very first few years, now I've stopped doing it. I will take out all the wheat and rice that my mother had stocked and give it away to the poor. I would say, why are we keeping so much of food at home? Why do we have to hoard? Is it rational? Is it rational to have bank accounts, cupboards, safe deposit vaults, 200 clothes, when I do not know whether I will exist tomorrow or not? I do not know whether I will die tonight. Is it rational? No, but there is greed. And this is why, for instance, Gandhi says, there is enough for one man's, for everybody's need, but not for one man's greed. So the public-private, now, if I have, and let's go to the first, this is something which, philosophers say, that the first time property was distributed in the world, property is private, the first time it was distributed in the history of the world, was it equal? Everybody got the same thing. And I often ask my students to take this exercise. When did we start notes in India? I did this after demonetization. So after demonetization, I went to the class and I said, when the first time when notes started in India, first there were coins, made coins. So, say Akbar would give sikkas, not notes. Okay, and that is one problem that Marx has with notes, paper. So I asked my students that when was notes first started in India? When we started the printing press. So the printing press started. How were notes for the first time distributed? Sabko same mila. This is a question, this is historical. How did we first distribute the notes which came out from the printing press? Equally. I don't want to answer that question. Somebody is doing a research on it right now. And she's amazed she's gone into the archives, she's sitting in Nehru Memorial. She's going into the archives just to find out how did we distribute the day the printing press first came out with the first note in India. Distribute kaise hua? So according to Marx, the private is political. Feminism was not the first to say it. Marx was the first to say it. That capitalism, which you think is private economy, is not private economy. It is political economy. It is political. What does political mean? Political means conflict. There is a disagreement. So I disagree with the fact that few people should own so much. Why? Gandhi also says the same thing. Gandhi says the public-private divide should not be there. What is the private? The private is religion. The private is morality. The private is spirituality. And that should guide politics. We can't have a politics which is devoid of morality. No ethics, no values, you want to have politics. And this is what Machiavelli did. Machiavelli said in politics there is no need for any morality. You can do whatever you want to do. And we are influenced by it. In fact, today Indian democracy is influenced by it. Kuch bhi karo, jeetna hi hai. What would Gandhi say? Gandhi says, no, morality has to guide politics. That is why, after the Chauri Chaura incident, Gandhi withdrew the non-cooperation movement. Because he said, this is unethical. We cannot continue like this. Alright? So they both believe, in fact, I said this last time, the concept of ashram is neither private nor public. Ashram is not a private space. Ashram is also not a public space. So he plays with this public-private divide, and so does Marx. Marx also plays with it. In fact, they both played with boundaries so much that after teaching Marx and Gandhi to a class, it is difficult to even continue teaching anybody else. But I'll keep that for now. Again, something common to both of them is they both advocated a need-based understanding of justice. What is justice? Justice is how much is due to me? How much is due? So you say, for instance, how much is due to Lajpati? Maybe 80 rupees a day is all right? I do not know. I don't want to get into what the BPL, APL index of India says. But maybe 80 rupees is all right? No. Maybe if I'm ill, then maybe 200 rupees is all right if I'm on medication. If I have a family who is dependent on me, then maybe 500 rupees is all right. So how much is due? Now, what does liberalism say? Liberalism says you can accumulate as much as you want. Take as much as you want. What does Marx say? Take as much as you need. How much do you need? You need 2 slices of 2 rotis in the night. You take it. Again you come tomorrow and again take another 2 rotis. Maybe that time you need 1 roti. Maybe you need 3 rotis. Take as much as you need. That is also what Gandhi says. Gandhi says, let us distribute according to need. How much do you need? The ashram is not a place which I say this room is mine. This is mine. If you go to Sabarmati ashram, now the government says they are going to modernize it, and I think they are going to do a lot of injustice to Gandhi. If you see Gandhi's, that ashram, no, you really wonder, I mean, when I take somebody to the ashram, they say, we thought it is going to have a lot of things. There is nothing. So I tell them, but that is Gandhi. He didn't own anything. There is literally nothing in Sabarmati ashram. that belongs to Gandhi, because nothing belonged to the man. He didn't own anything. Interestingly, Gandhi did not even want to own his family. And if you read Tridib Surud's Bapu, My Father, which came out as a movie, I'm a little disappointed with Gandhi as a father. The movie is called Bapu, My Father, and it is written by Tridib Surud, who was in MS University. Now he is the director of Chairperson of Sabarmati Ashram. What is this need-based understanding? I talked about politics of hope. What is this need-based understanding? This need-based understanding is politics of limits. You should have a limit. Does contemporary society have any limits? No. So Samsung 5 nikla. Within 4 months, Samsung 6 nikal gaya. Let us first digest Samsung 5. I'm not branding, I'm not using a company. If you have one cream coming out, you will have a better cream, same company coming out. If you have 3-bedroom flat, you want 4-bedroom flat. Then you want a bungalow, and because it's more limit. This is Kaun Banega Crorepati is a game which violates the politics of limits. So do you want more? And who is going to say no? Who is going to say no, I don't want more? But human beings are based on limits. We have to have limits. We are time binders. We have to have a limit. Even our memory has a limit. Our body has a limit. Our passions have a limit. Then why is it that when we talk about society or our relation with society, there is no limit? Look at what we have done to the environment. The environment is in the condition that it is in because we are not applying a politics of limits, a philosophy of limits to the environment. Cut as many trees as you can. Do you need them? I don't think so. But cut. There is no limit. We have destroyed the environment because we don't have a philosophy of limits. And a philosophy of limits was given to us by Gandhi and Marx. Interestingly, both Gandhi and Marx do not look at the state as the site of empowerment. When India became free, and I'll share one episode which I read in a book and I went to the archives to verify. Is this true? So the day the Constitution is passed, 1949, 26 November, the Constituent Assembly members stand in the balcony of the Parliament and hordes of people are down. They're very happy. Naya Kanun, Hamara Kanun. I mean, it's something which had really changed India. Hamara Kanun, the Kanun we, our Hamara. So there are hordes of people trying to get into they think he apna hi hai, Hamara hai. Look at this. I mean, I don't know, the innocence of the Indian people. I read it in a book and I said, this is not true. So I went and I checked the archives and it's in the papers of 25th November 1949. So they, as soon as Nehru and the Constituent Assembly members come out and say, we have adopted the Constitution, they all barge in. They think, Hamara ho gaya na, ab to hum hai. So they barge into the Parliament. They barge in and police come. Obviously police have to come. And police come and says, Bahar, ye aapka nahi, Bahar. Now this is, we thought when the state becomes free, the state will empower us. Both Gandhi and Marx, no, the state is not the site of empowerment. That is why Gandhi, in 1930 he wrote, the state is like the coils of a snake. They will engulf you, and those of you who have seen Anaconda, I think Anaconda is influenced by Gandhi. And whenever I see Anaconda, I feel, dekho, ye state. So I was reading, and I love reading, actually it's my only thing which I enjoy doing. I don't enjoy many things. So I was reading this book by Judith Butler and Gayatri Spivak. And the first, and that really set me thinking, the first question that it's a dialogue between Butler and Spivak. They are phenomenal thinkers of the world today. In fact, Spivak just got the MLA award, which is the most prestigious academic award in the world. So the first question that Spivak asks Butler is, why do we say state? When do we say state? We say, I'm in a state, which means I'm in a mess. Do we say, I'm in a state? No, we say, I'm in a state. This is a state. I'm in a mess. When do we confront the state? I'm talking like Gandhi and Marx. When do we confront the state? When we are in a mess. The police, the courts, the administration. When we are in a mess, that is when we confront the state. Do we say, chalo aaj kuch nahi karne ke liye, chalo police station jata. Let's go to the police station. We time pass karke aate. Or let's go to the court, time pass karke aate. No. So why do we say state? I say I'm in a state. This is a state. Alright? It means this is a mess. Why do we use this word? Alright? Both Gandhi and Marx say the state is not the site of empowerment. Who should be empowered? The people. And I think I said this last time. Civil society has to be the space of empowerment. So the state is not the site of democratic sovereignty. That is why democracy allows protests. It is because it recognizes that the state ought to be limited by democratic protest. My next point, I will give this credit to Purushottam Rao. When I was returning back to Hyderabad the last time I came here, we were discussing my paper, which I presented, and he said, which I never thought of, but then I read, that both Gandhi and Marx, so I owe this to him, both Gandhi and Marx, they have a comprehensive understanding of man as a moral being. Man is moral. Man is not political. What does somebody like Hobbes say? Hobbes is somebody who has changed the way we look at ourselves. What does he say? He says, if there is no state, Jungle Raj ho jayega. Okay. So at one time Bihar was Jungle Raj. Q, because state manages us. State tells us, you can't do this, you can't do that. Why do we need the state? Why do I need someone to tell me how to behave? Because I'm political. I'm only political. So I often tell my students, the door is closed. Our room, they come into my room, there's a big heads room. And they love the classes to be there. If they're just, the MA classes particularly, where they're just 17 or 18. And they enjoy the classes there. Because one, they get to sit on some sofa-like things, and I do not mind it because it's not my money, it's public fund. And second is the classes can go on endlessly. Because if I'm using the classroom, then the next class will come and take away, the teacher will come and say, please go out, it's now my turn. So in my office, nobody can tell me to go out. So the classes sometimes go on for 3 hours. So I tell them the door is closed. Am I not killing you because I'm scared of the police? I'm not killing you because I'm scared the police will come and take me away. Or is there a morality in me where I'm not harming you? Much of us say, nahi, this is the question, can the police go on strike? No. Why? Because it is believed that if the police go on strike, God bless us. No? But why? Gandhi will say, but why? One of my students is in Cambridge working on police, the colonial police. When did the police start in India? Because remember, before colonial master came, there was no police. And I met him recently, so he told me that, ma'am, I have some very interesting findings. And I said, tell me. So he said the first time the police was made, very interesting research he's doing. That the first time when the colonial master thought of making the police, I'm diverting, I know, but I think this is going to be of some interest to you. When the colonial master thought of the police, who did they make as police? The lower castes. Why? Because जैसे ही वो गली में आते हैं, सारे upper caste घर के अंदर चले जाते हैं. उनका their shadow should not touch the upper caste. So if there is a mob and the lower caste policeman goes, everybody disperses. Excellent strategy of the colonial police, of the colonial master in terms of the police. But interestingly, something else. One day, the colonial police decide we are going on strike, because they were not told that police do not strike. So the colonial police go on strike, and the colonial master doesn't know what to do. How do you tell these people, aapko strike pe nahi jana hota hai? Aap to police ho. Alright? So you have this understanding, and he is doing his research. He'll be earning his PhD shortly. But he has some interesting findings on the colonial police. So you have this thing that without the state, we cannot exist, because we are political, we are not moral. Both Gandhi and Marx argue we are moral. We don't need the police. We don't need the state. Ram Rajya or communist utopia is based on our moral being. We are moral. And I owe this right to Purushottam Rao. And finally, on the similarities, both are theorists of dissent. You should dissent. How did Gandhi dissent? Disobedience. Disobedient. The man disobeyed everything. I mean, the court says, we find you guilty. You have to pay a fine of 500 pounds. I refuse to pay. Okay. So the judge says, all right, the court finds you guilty, and you read this in My Experiments of Truth. My Experiments with Truth. The court finds you guilty, you're charged with a penalty of 250 pounds, I refuse to pay. 50 pounds, I refuse to pay. And kind of this happened in colonial India, we were not citizens. You're not supposed to refuse. Right? You're a subject, you're not a citizen. You have no right, how can you refuse? But Gandhi, disobedience. Disobedient, he was a really disobedient, messy Indian. Very, not messy in terms of dirt, but messy in terms of idea. Very messy and very disobedient. I mean, he would even disobey. It's there in that Richard Attenborough's movie about Nehru coming to Gandhi and saying, Bapu, there is something very urgent. And he says, my goat is not well. I have to take care of it. This is disobedience. I mean, Gandhi is not a small man. You begin to say goat. India ka problem, you are worried about the goat, but goat is more important for Gandhi, disobedient Gandhi. So, for Gandhi, dissent is disobedience. And for Marx, dissent is revolution. Both theorize dissent. What is the role of the person? It is to dissent. Why do we need to dissent? We need to dissent to keep, I think, two things alive. One is our Swaraj. Swaraj cannot be attained without dissent. And second is it respects our thinking capacity. If I ask my students, who do you think is the best, which is the best government in India, and they say, Jo aap bolo madam. What is the best food to eat? Jo aap bolo madam. Who is the best person to be the president of India? Jo aap bolo madam. Are they thinking? Are they free? When I say, for instance, Mr. X or Miss X should be the next president of India, and they say, we disagree. That is when they are thinking and free. Not when they say, Madam ne bola hai, zarur sach hoga. Okay? So you have to dissent. And dissent doesn't mean तलवार उठा के खड़े हो जाओ, dissent. नहीं, तलवार is, I mean, dissent is simply, I disagree. I have my own views. I am thinking. Unfortunately in India, I think much of the thinking has come to an end. Much of the hope has come to an end. Much of the limits have come to an end. Much of dissent has come to an end. I was shocked yesterday when I met somebody from JNU. And he told me that the students have not attended the end semester exams. There have been no end semester exams in JNU. Forget about JNU. In a university, the students have not gone for an end semester exam. The paper is not covering it. The newspaper does not cover this. So all that Gandhi and Marx stood for seems to be dying. They are relevant. I mean, I'm absolutely all right if someone says this is not relevant for us at all. But then, what is relevant for India today if these ideas are not relevant? Where did Gandhi and Marx differ? And there are very few points, but I would like to elaborate. The first is obviously religion. For Gandhi, religion was guiding force. And we know that Gandhi was influenced by Jainism, by Christianity. If Gandhi went on penance, Gandhi went on fast. Fast is considered as penance in Christianity. In Hinduism, and I'm not a religious scholar and I have very little understanding of Hinduism, whatever I have is my discussions with scholars who claim to know Hinduism. The problem I think with us is, although religion has dominated much of public space in India, even today, I do not know of any institute of religious studies in India. There is no institute of religious studies. So if I want to study Hinduism, where do I go? I want to study Hinduism academically, not to become a priest. I want to understand Hinduism. I want to understand Jainism, not to become a Jain monk. मुझे नहीं practice करना. I want to understand. But है ही नहीं. In the West, we have many institutes of theological studies. Okay. It's interesting that the person who is regarded as the most noted Sanskrit scholar in the world is white. Sheldon Pollock. I know the present government doesn't really appreciate it because, for whatever reason. So Gandhi is very